most of the damage in our relationships doesn't come from the big fights or the loud arguments. It comes in the quiet moments we don't talk about, the distance that slowly grows when words stop being safe, when conversations turn into battles, or when silence feels easier than being misunderstood again. That's the part that wears us down. And if I had to start over, if I had to rebuild my life from scratch, I wouldn't begin with money or status or even fixing mistakes. I'd start with communication, because the way we speak, the way we listen, the way we choose our words when it's hard, that becomes the blueprint for every relationship we have, including the one with ourselves. Most of us are carrying around conversations that never happened, words we swallowed because we didn't know how they'd land, and misunderstandings that built walls we never intended to build. It's heavy even when we don't talk about it, and it leaves us second, guessing ourselves, wondering if we said too much or not enough, or the wrong thing altogether. I've been there, and if I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, I wouldn't start with a fresh job, a new place, or even different circumstances. I'd start with how I communicate, because the way we speak and the way we listen, that's what shapes trust, connection, and peace. That's the blueprint everything else stands on. The words we use carry more weight than we realize. They can build trust or tear it down. They can make someone feel safe enough to open up or guarded enough to shut down. Most of us don't set out to hurt the people we care about, but the truth is, it doesn't always take harsh language to do damage. Sometimes it's the sigh in our tone, the quick dismissal, the sharp edge on a word that lingers long after we've forgotten saying it. And the other person holds on to it because it landed on a wound we didn't even see. Words don't just describe what we feel, they shape the way someone else feels about being with us. Think about the last time you felt misunderstood. Maybe someone cut you off mid-sentence, or brushed aside what you were trying to say, or used a phrase that made you feel small. In that moment, it wasn't just about the words themselves. It was about what the words told you, that you weren't worth the space, that your feelings weren't valid, that your voice didn't carry weight. And it doesn't matter if the other person didn't mean it that way. What matters is the impact. That's what shapes connection. That's what makes us either lean in or pull back. Most people don't realize how quickly connection is either built or broken. It's not in the grand gestures, it's in the everyday exchanges. It's in whether we say, "I hear you," instead of "you're overreacting." It's in choosing to ask, "Can you tell me more?" instead of rushing to fix the problem or explain why the other person shouldn't feel that way. Words can be a bridge or a wall, and we're laying bricks every single time we open our mouths. Here's the hard part: when tension rises, most of us default to the words that protect us instead of the ones that connect us. We defend, we justify, we minimize, we attack. And in doing so, we might feel like we've won the moment, but we've lost the relationship ground underneath. Because the other person doesn't remember our logic, they remember the sting. They remember how we made them feel when they risked showing up honestly. And when that happens enough times, people stop trying. They go quiet, not because they don't care, but because it feels safer not to. I've sat across from couples, friends, even family members who love each other deeply, but you wouldn't know it from the way they talk. They want closeness, but their words keep pulling them apart. It sounds like "you always," or "you never." It sounds like sarcasm passed off as humor. It sounds like short, clipped answers that carry more resentment than honesty. And then both sides walk away thinking, why can't they just understand me? The truth is, neither of them feels understood because neither of them feels safe in the conversation. Safety in communication isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about knowing that even when conflict happens, your worth in the relationship isn't on the line. The words you use are what gives someone that assurance. Saying, "I'm frustrated, but I still love you," builds connection. Saying, "I don't agree, but I want to understand," builds connection. Saying, "That hurt me, but I want to work through it," builds connection. These aren't just nice phrases, they're lifelines. They tell the other person, "You're still safe with me, even when this is hard." Now, some of us grew up in environments where words were used as weapons. Maybe you heard more criticism than encouragement. Maybe silence was punishment. Maybe shouting was the only way to be heard. And if that's what shaped you, it makes sense that your communication now might lean toward defense, withdrawal, or control. That's not a flaw in who you are, it's a pattern you learn to survive. But here's the good news: patterns can change. And the starting place is awareness, realizing that the way you speak has been carrying forward old survival tactics into new relationships that don't need them. Changing the words you use isn't about becoming perfect or polished. It's about becoming intentional. It's about pausing long enough to ask yourself, what do I want to leave behind in this conversation? Do I want to leave a scar, or do I want to leave a sense of safety? That pause, that one breath, can mean the difference between saying something that shuts a person down and saying something that opens them up. I can't tell you how many people I've heard say, it was just words. I didn't mean anything by it. But here's the truth to the person on the other end. It's never just words. It's identity, it's belonging, it's memory. Years later, people won't remember the exact situation, but they'll remember how your words made them feel. Did they feel seen? Did they feel small? Did they feel valued or dismissed? That's what lasts. If you want to build connection, start with the simplest shifts. Replace "you always" with "I feel." Trade sarcasm for honesty. Swap quick answers with curiosity. Instead of shutting someone down with a solution, try staying with their problem long enough for them to feel understood. Connection isn't built on agreement, it's built on understanding. And the words we choose are the proof of whether or not we're willing to try. Here's the thing, none of this is about being eloquent or having the perfect response. It's about showing the other person that you're not using your words as weapons or shields. You're using them as tools to connect. That might look like saying, "I didn't handle that well, can we try again?" It might look like slowing down when your instinct is to speed up. It might even look like sitting in silence for a moment until you can find words that don't come from anger alone. Every relationship you care about is built on a history of words. And if that history has fractures, the repair won't come from pretending they don't exist. It will come from choosing different words moving forward. Words that admit where you fell short. Words that extend forgiveness. Words that say, "I'm still here." That's how you rebuild trust, one sentence at a time. When you think about the people who matter most to you, ask yourself, what story do my words tell them? Do they tell them they're loved? Do they tell them they're heard? Or do they tell them they have to be careful around me? The answer to that question is what determines whether your relationships grow closer or further apart. And the choice every single day is in your mouth before it's anywhere else. So yes, words can build or break connection, but the power isn't in the words alone. It's in the intention behind them, the courage to choose them differently, and the humility to repair when you get it wrong. You don't have to speak perfectly to build connection. You just have to speak with care, with honesty, and with the quiet strength of someone who knows that every word lays a brick in the foundation of the life you're trying to build. When trust is broken, even in small ways, the hardest thing to do is listen. Not just hear words, but actually listen. Because when trust is gone, everything feels loaded. Every sentence gets filtered through suspicion. Every pause feels like withholding. Every explanation feels like an excuse. It's exhausting for both people. And the truth is, most of us don't realize how quickly we stop listening once trust has been shaken. We start protecting ourselves instead. We rehearse our comebacks in our head while the other person is still talking. We nitpick their wording, searching for proof they're not telling the full truth. We hold onto their past mistakes like armor, ready to throw them back the second we feel cornered. Listening stops being about understanding and starts being about defense. But here's what I've learned: you can't rebuild trust without relearning how to listen, because trust doesn't just come from someone else keeping their word. It comes from us giving them enough space to be heard, and that's one of the most difficult shifts we'll ever have to make. When we've been hurt, our ears close up faster than our hearts. We don't want to give someone the chance to let us down again. And yet, without listening, there's no path forward. There's no healing. There's just two people locked in their own stories, convinced the other one will never understand. Relearning how to listen doesn't mean pretending like nothing happened. It doesn't mean ignoring the hurt or forcing yourself to trust before you're ready. It means creating a space where honesty has a chance to show up. It means listening not for perfection, but for effort. Because if someone is trying to rebuild trust with you, their words will probably come out messy. They might stumble, they might backtrack, they might not get it right the first time. If we're only listening for flawless proof, we'll miss the progress. And if we can't recognize progress, trust never gets the oxygen it needs to grow. Think about a time when you were trying to explain yourself after making a mistake. Maybe you were nervous. Maybe you knew the other person had every reason not to believe you. What you wanted most in that moment wasn't for them to instantly trust you again. What you wanted was for them to listen long enough to see that you cared. That's all most people are asking for. Not blind forgiveness, not immediate repair, just the chance to be heard without every word being twisted against them. Listening in these moments is hard because hurt has a way of distorting sound. If you've been lied to, you'll hear deception even where it doesn't exist. If you've been betrayed, you'll hear selfishness even in honest words. That's not weakness, that's your nervous system trying to protect you. But protection isn't the same as healing. Healing only begins when we can slow down enough to separate the past from the present. To remind ourselves, this is a new conversation, not a replay of the old one. This person is speaking now, not then. And if I don't listen differently now, we'll stay stuck in the same loop. We're learning how to listen when trust is gone looks less like a skill and more like a posture. It's not about nodding at the right times or repeating back what you heard. It's about being willing to sit with discomfort without cutting it off. It's about resisting the urge to finish their sentences, even when you think you know where they're going. It's about leaving space for someone to get it wrong before they get it right. And sometimes it's about saying out loud, I'm struggling to believe you, but I'm here and I'm listening. That sentence alone can change the tone of an entire conversation. It tells the other person, you haven't earned back my full trust yet, but I'm giving you the respect of my attention. There's a difference between listening to reply and listening to understand. Most of us live in the first category, especially when trust has been damaged. We're already forming our defense before the other person finishes. But understanding requires patience. It requires stepping out of the courtroom in your head where you're the judge, jury, and an executioner, and instead becoming a witness. Just watching, just listening, just observing without rushing to a verdict. That doesn't mean you agree with everything you hear. It doesn't mean you excuse what's been done. It means you allow yourself to understand before you decide what to do next. I've seen relationships survive betrayal, lies, broken promises, not because one person gave a perfect apology, but because the other person chose to listen differently. They gave the offender room to explain. They asked questions instead of assumptions. They stayed in the conversation longer than their pain wanted them to. And over time, that choice to listen softened defenses on both sides. It opened up a pathway for honesty to actually mean something again. Now, I want to be clear, listening doesn't guarantee reconciliation. There are times when the damage runs too deep, when listening only confirms that someone isn't willing to change. But even then, listening matters because it gives you clarity. It lets you walk away knowing you gave the conversation every chance to succeed. And clarity, even without reconciliation, is a form of peace. On the other hand, when there is genuine effort, listening becomes the soil that trust grows in. Each conversation becomes a seed. Not every seed will sprout. Some words will still sting, some apologies will fall flat. But if you keep listening for effort, for small signs of change, eventually you'll notice something different. You'll notice tone softening. You'll notice more honesty, less defensiveness. You'll notice the walls lowering inch by inch. That's how trust returns, not in a grand gesture, but in a series of moments where listening makes room for rebuilding. If you're the one trying to rebuild trust, remember this. The other person's ability to listen doesn't erase your responsibility to speak with honesty. You can't demand to be heard while still hiding the truth. You can't rebuild trust while keeping one foot in dishonesty. Relearning how to listen is a shared effort. One person opening their ears, the other opening their heart. Both are required. Both take courage. Listening when trust is gone will feel unnatural at first. It will feel like you're setting yourself up to be hurt again. And in some cases, you might be. But the alternative Staying in silence, in distance, in self-protection guarantees the relationship won't heal. If there's even a chance you want it to, it starts here. Not with the perfect plan, not with the perfect apology, but with the willingness to hear someone out when everything in you wants to shut down. So maybe the question isn't, can I trust them again? Maybe the first question is, can I listen again? Because trust doesn't return in one big moment. It returns in the slow rebuilding of conversations where two people choose presence over protection, honesty over defense, and listening over silence. And if you can start there, just start by relearning how to listen. You give trust the only chance it has to come back. Hard conversations are where most relationships either grow stronger or start to break apart. And the difference isn't usually about the topic itself. It's about whether both people feel safe enough to stay in it. Safety doesn't mean comfort. Hard conversations, by definition, aren't comfortable. Safety means even though this is difficult, I still know I won't be attacked, dismissed, or abandoned for speaking my truth. Without that, conversations stop being about connection and start being about survival. And when we're in survival mode, we don't listen to understand. We defend, we retreat, we shut down, or we lash out. Think about how quickly safety can be lost in an argument. One sharp tone, one sarcastic jab, one eye roll. Suddenly, it's no longer about solving the issue, it's about protecting yourself from more hurt. And that protection takes different forms. Some people go quiet, withdrawing into silence that says, I'm not going to risk more damage. Others go loud, raising their voice to make sure they aren't ignored. Some people shift the spotlight back, pointing out the other person's flaws to get the heat off themselves. These moves might feel natural in the moment, but each one chips away at the sense of safety. Because the unspoken message is, it's not safe to be honest here. The real issue underneath so many communication breakdowns is this lack of safety. You can have all the right tools, all the perfect phrasing, but if the person you're talking to doesn't feel safe, the words won't matter. They'll be listening for danger, not connection. They'll be bracing for rejection, not leaning in for understanding. And that's when the cycle begins. Two people talking, but neither one actually hearing. Both walking away more frustrated, more distant, more convinced the other person will never get it. So what does it look like to find safety in conversations that feel hard? First, it starts with responsibility. Each of us has the power to either create or destroy safety with how we show up. That means taking ownership of our tone, our words, and even our body language. You don't have to agree with someone to treat them with dignity. You don't have to like what you're hearing to make it clear they're still safe to share it. Safety is communicated in the way we breathe, the way we pause before responding, the way we choose to stay calm when everything in us wants to react. Safety also comes from honesty, not brutal honesty that cuts, but compassionate honesty that tells the truth without stripping away respect. Saying, I'm hurt by what happened, but I want to work through this with you, communicates both pain and commitment. Saying, I don't see it the way you do, but I'm listening, holds disagreement and openness in the same space. These kinds of statements give the other person permission to stay engaged because they know the conversation won't cost them the relationship. Sometimes, creating safety means slowing down. When a conversation gets heated, our nervous system speeds up. Heart rate climbs, voices rise, defenses kick in. And if we don't regulate ourselves, the conversation quickly spins out of control. One of the most powerful things you can do in a hard moment is simply breathe and slow your response. Silence, when used with intention, isn't avoidance. It's creating room for both people to recenter. A few seconds of calm can prevent hours of damage. It's also worth noticing how safety is connected to trust. If trust is already fragile, hard conversations feel even riskier. That's why sometimes the first step isn't diving into the hardest subject head on, but starting with smaller conversations where you prove, I can handle this without making it unsafe. Each safe exchange builds a little more trust, and that trust becomes the foundation for tackling the harder things. Think of it like strengthening a muscle. You don't lift the heaviest weight first. You build up gradually so you don't injure what you're trying to heal. Now, none of this means avoiding truth to keep things light. Avoidance doesn't create safety, it creates distance. Pretending everything is fine when it isn't only delays the conflict and usually makes it worse. when it finally comes out. Real safety is when truth and care exist together. It's when you can say the hard thing without the other person fearing you'll leave, and when they can hear it without fearing they're about to be torn apart. I've seen people stay in patterns of silence for years because they didn't feel safe enough to bring up the truth. And what happens? Resentment builds, connection fades, love gets buried under unspoken words. On the outside, things look calm. On the inside, things are unraveling. That's why safety isn't a luxury in relationships. It's the foundation. Without it, even the smallest issues become unmanageable. With it, even the hardest conversations can bring you closer. One of the simplest but hardest skills in creating safety is validating without agreeing. You don't have to share someone's perspective to acknowledge their feelings. Saying, "I can see this is really important to you," or "I get why that hurt," doesn't cost you anything, but it buys so much trust. Validation says, "Your experience matters." And when someone feels validated, they don't have to fight as hard to be understood. That opens the door for a calmer, more honest exchange. Another piece of safety is clarity. Vague words and half-truths breed insecurity. If you're upset, say you're upset. If you're confused, say you're confused. If you need a break, say you need a break. Clarity builds safety because the other person doesn't have to guess where you stand. Guessing leads to assumptions, and assumptions almost always lead to conflict. Directness, when paired with kindness, gives everyone firmer ground to stand on. And sometimes finding safety in conversations that feel hard means naming the fear out loud, saying, "I'm nervous to bring this up because I don't want it to push us apart," disarms the tension. It shows vulnerability instead of aggression. It makes it clear the goal isn't to win, it's to stay connected. That kind of honesty often softens the other person's defensiveness because you've shown them the cost you're carrying just to have the conversation. Safety isn't about never getting upset. It's not about always having the right words. It's about sending the consistent message, even when it's messy, even when it's tense. This relationship is still a safe place to land. That doesn't happen in one conversation. It happens over time in the way we handle each hard moment. Do we attack or do we invite? Do we shut down or do we lean in? Do we make the other person regret opening up, or do we make them feel grateful they trusted us with their truth? If you've ever walked away from a conversation thinking, "I'll never share that again," then you know how powerful the loss of safety can be. And if you've ever walked away thinking, "That was hard, but I feel closer now," then you know how powerful the presence of safety can be. The difference isn't in the topic, it's in how both people showed up. So the next time a conversation feels heavy, don't aim for comfort, aim for safety. Ask yourself, how can I make this space safe even if it stays hard? That might mean softening your tone. That might mean slowing your response. That might mean naming your fears or validating theirs. But if safety stays the priority, the conversation has a chance to bring healing instead of more harm. And in the end, that's what every hard conversation is really about. Not proving who's right, but protecting the bond that makes being right matter in the first place. Emotional distance rarely shows up all at once. It doesn't usually begin with a big fight or a sudden decision. Most of the time, it creeps in slowly in the small, everyday moments we stop noticing. It's when, "How was your day?" turns into, "Fine." It's when the phone gets more eye contact than the person sitting across from you. It's when the goodnight kiss doesn't happen, not because anyone's angry, but because both people are too tired and assume it doesn't matter. Over time, those little things start to add up, and before you know it, two people who care about each other are living side by side like roommates instead of partners, friends or family. The love is still there, but the closeness is gone. That's emotional distance. The hard part about emotional distance is that it feels safer than conflict. When things get tense, pulling back feels easier than leaning in. We tell ourselves, "I don't want to make things worse," or "I'll just keep this to myself," or "They don't really care, so why bother?" And little by little, silence replaces connection. But the truth is, distance doesn't protect us, it isolates us. It gives the illusion of peace, but underneath, it grows resentment, loneliness, and a quiet ache that says, "I'm not seen anymore." That's why healing emotional distance takes more than one big conversation. It takes simple, consistent habits that remind the other person, You matter. I still want you close. One of the most powerful habits is presence. Not just being in the same room, but being there fully. When someone feels emotionally far away, the last thing they need is more half attention. They don't need you scrolling through your phone while they talk or nodding while your mind is somewhere else. They need your eyes, your tone, your patience. Presence is what tells another person, you're worth my full attention. It's not complicated. Sometimes it's as simple as putting the phone face down, leaning in and saying, I'm listening. That small shift alone can start to close the gap. Another habit is small expressions of care. Emotional distance often makes us think we need a grand gesture to fix it. A long talk, a weekend away, a deep heart to heart. Those can help, but the truth is, small, everyday actions usually do more. Sending a quick text that says, thinking about you. Pausing to ask, do you need anything? Giving a hug that lasts a few seconds longer than usual. These aren't dramatic, but they chip away at the walls that distance builds. They remind the other person that even in the middle of routine, they are still on your mind. Then there's the habit of honest check-ins. Emotional distance thrives in unspoken assumptions. We assume the other person is fine. We assume they know how we feel. We assume the silence means everything's okay. But assumptions build walls, while honest questions open doors. Asking, how are we doing? Or have I been distant lately? Takes courage because you might not like the answer. But that kind of honesty also creates safety. It tells the other person, I care enough to ask and I care enough to hear the truth. Over time, these check-ins keep small gaps from becoming unbridgeable divides. Gratitude is another simple but overlooked habit that heals emotional distance. When we feel far from someone, we often focus on what's missing, what's wrong, what we're not getting. Gratitude shifts the lens. Saying, I appreciate how hard you're working, or thank you for making time for me may not fix everything, but it plants seeds of closeness. It tells the other person, I see you. And being seen is one of the deepest human needs. When someone feels seen, they naturally move closer. It's also important to rebuild habits of affection. For many relationships, physical or verbal affection is one of the first things to fade when distance grows. You stop saying, I love you. As often, you stop reaching for their hand. You stop sitting close on the couch. These small acts feel optional in the moment, but over time, their absence becomes loud. Affection doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be intentional. A touch on the shoulder, a smile when they walk into the room, a kind word before bed. Each small act says, I still want to connect. One habit that's harder but just as necessary is repair. Every relationship has moments where things are said or done that create hurt. Distance grows when those moments go unaddressed. Repair is the habit of circling back, of saying, I know that came out wrong earlier and I don't want it to sit between us. Or, I realize I've been distracted lately and I don't want you to feel like I'm not here. Repair doesn't erase the mistake, but it keeps the mistake from turning into distance. It shows humility, responsibility, and a willingness to try again. Of course, none of these habits work if they aren't consistent. Healing emotional distance is about what you do repeatedly, not what you do once. It's the steady drip of effort that slowly fills the empty space. The good news is simple habits are easier to sustain. You don't need to overhaul your entire relationship in a day. You just need to start small and keep showing up. A few minutes of full attention, a kind word, a thoughtful question. Over time, those moments stack up and the distance begins to shrink. Sometimes the hardest part is taking the first step. When you feel emotionally far from someone, it's easy to wait for them to move first. To think they're the one who pulled away, so they should be the one to fix it. But waiting only reinforces the gap. The truth is, someone has to go first, and going first doesn't make you weak, it makes you invested. It says, this relationship matters to me enough that I'll take the first step toward closeness. And often, once one person starts, the other follows. Healing emotional distance also requires patience. If the gap has been growing for months or years, 1 or 2 good conversations won't erase it overnight. You may put in effort and not see immediate change. That doesn't mean it isn't working. Distance is built slowly and it's healed slowly. The habits may feel small at first, but consistency gives them power. Just like erosion wears down a rock over time, care wears down distance the same way. If you've ever felt emotional distance in a relationship, you know how painful it is. You can be sitting right next to someone and feel completely alone. But you also know how meaningful it is when that distance starts to close, when small gestures remind you you're loved, when presence makes you feel seen again, when words of gratitude soften your guard. That closeness isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on the simple habits, repeated daily, that slowly bring two people back within reach of each other's hearts. So if you're feeling that distance now, start small. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect words. Pick one habit, presence, gratitude, check-ins, affection, repair, and practice it today. Do it again tomorrow and again the next day. Because healing doesn't come from waiting for closeness to magically return. It comes from choosing closeness one simple habit at a time. And if you keep choosing it, the distance won't stand a chance. Every relationship you've ever had, whether it's with a partner, a friend, a parent, or even yourself, stands on one foundation: communication. Not how much you love each other, not how long you've been together, not how many good memories you share. All of those matter, but without honest communication, none of them can hold a relationship up for very long. Because love without honesty turns into guesswork. Memories without honesty turn into nostalgia for a closeness that doesn't exist anymore. And time without honesty becomes distance, two people still connected on paper, but slowly drifting apart in reality. The real struggle for most of us isn't that we don't want to be honest. It's that honesty feels risky. Being honest means saying the thing you're afraid might upset them. It means admitting when you've messed up. It means being vulnerable about needs you'd rather hide or fears you'd rather push down. Honesty feels dangerous because it hands someone else power, the power to misunderstand you, to reject you, to not handle your truth with care. And for a lot of people, past experiences have proven that risk real. If you grew up in a home where honesty was met with anger or where your feelings were ignored, it makes sense that honesty doesn't feel safe. But here's the paradox: the very thing that feels the riskiest is also the only thing that makes relationships safe. Honest communication is what tells the other person, you don't have to guess where you stand with me. You don't have to read between the lines or wonder if I mean what I say. You can trust my words even when they're hard. That kind of trust is what allows people to relax in a relationship. Without it, everything is tense. Without it, every silence feels suspicious, every compliment feels questionable, every "I'm fine" feels like it might hide something bigger. Honesty isn't always comfortable, but it's the only way to build security. Think about the last time you knew someone wasn't being completely honest with you. Even if their words sounded right, you could feel the gap. Maybe it was the hesitation in their tone, the way they avoided eye contact, or how their story didn't quite line up. That gap creates unease. And in that unease, trust begins to erode. Because if I can't trust what you're saying, I can't trust the closeness we share. On the flip side, think about when someone told you the truth, even though it was hard. Maybe they admitted a mistake or confessed something vulnerable. That moment may have stung, but it also created relief. Because now you know where you stand. Now you know you're dealing with what's real, not a polished version of it. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that hiding the truth protects the relationship. We think, if I tell them how I really feel, it will start a fight. Or, if I admit what I did, it will hurt them. So we hold back, we cover up, we smooth things over. But what we're really doing is trading short-term comfort for long-term distance. Because when the truth is missing, the relationship stops being real. The other person is no longer connected to us. They're connected to a version of us we've edited to be safer. And the longer that goes on, the more both people feel the disconnection, even if they can't name it. Honest communication doesn't mean saying everything that crosses your mind without filter. That's not honesty, that's recklessness. Real honesty is paired with care. It says, I respect you enough to tell you the truth, and I respect you enough to deliver it in a way that we can work through it together. It's the difference between saying, you're impossible to talk to, and saying, I feel shut down when I try to share. Both are honest feelings, but one attacks while the other invites. Honesty without compassion can cut deep. Compassion without honesty avoids the wound. But honesty with compassion, that's what heals. When honesty becomes the foundation of a relationship, conflict changes. Conflict is no longer about who's right or wrong. It's about uncovering what's true and what needs to be understood. Imagine two people arguing. In one version, they're both hiding behind half-truths, saying just enough to defend themselves, but not enough to expose what's really going on. That argument goes in circles. Nobody feels heard, nobody feels seen, and the distance grows. In the other version, both people risk being honest. I was scared. I felt ignored. I didn't want to admit it, but I messed up. Those words are raw, but they're real. And because they're real, the conflict has a chance to bring the two closer instead of pushing them apart. The absence of honest communication shows up in subtle ways too. It shows up in the couple that never fights, but also never feels deeply connected. It shows up in the friendships where everything stays on the surface, safe and polite but shallow. It shows up in families where no one talks about the hard stuff, so everyone walks on eggshells instead of walking in freedom. Without honesty, connection becomes fragile. With it, connection becomes resilient. Sometimes people avoid honesty because they don't want to burden the other person. They think they already have enough on their plate. I don't want to add to it. But here's the truth. When you withhold, you're not protecting them. You're protecting yourself from discomfort. And in doing so, you rob them of the chance to really know you. Love can only exist where there is knowledge. If someone doesn't truly know what you think, feel, and need, then they can't truly love you. They can only love the version you let them see. I've watched relationships transform when two people decide to make honesty their default. Not brutal honesty, not selective honesty, but steady, compassionate honesty. It doesn't mean every conversation is easy. It doesn't mean trust never wavers. But it does mean that when trust is shaken, it can be rebuilt. Because honesty is the path back. It's what allows forgiveness to be real. It's what keeps hope alive. There's also a personal cost to dishonesty we don't often talk about. Every time you hide, you fracture yourself a little. You become split between who you are and who you present. That split is exhausting. It leads to anxiety, resentment, and even burnout in the relationship. Honest communication isn't just about protecting the bond. It's about protecting your own integrity. When your words align with your heart, you can rest. You don't have to manage a facade. You don't have to remember what you said last time. You can simply be. That freedom is one of the greatest gifts honesty gives. Honest communication is the foundation of every relationship because it's the only way trust can last. And without trust, there's nothing solid to build on. Trust is built in the small moments where you choose truth over comfort. It's built when you admit the mistake instead of covering it up. It's built when you share the need instead of swallowing it down. It's built when you say, here's where I really am, and the other person gets to meet you there. So if you feel distance in a relationship right now, ask yourself, what truth have I been holding back? What honesty have I been avoiding because I'm afraid of how it will land? That might be the very thing standing between you and closeness. Because closeness doesn't come from perfection. It comes from being willing to be seen even when it's messy. And every time you choose that kind of honesty, you strengthen the foundation under your relationship. You make it sturdier, safer, more real. And when the storms come, because they always do, that foundation is what will keep you standing.